Hello, internet friends. My name is Bay. Welcome back to the Shadowlands Alpha First Pass, First Impressions coverage. Here we are. It's time to talk about the Shadow Priest. And I have done my due diligence. I feel I definitely try to do right by the Feral Druid community, the Druid community overall. I've been reaching out the mages. There's been a handful of classes and specs here in all of my coverage where I've tried to make sure I poke those that should be poked, that have knowledge about more of this and a deeper understanding of these kind of systems than me. And I have spoken to many a Shadow Priest. There is information in the video description box down below from the Shadow Priest community through a series of forum threads, both about some very mathy stuff and of course about just a whole bunch of feedback therein as well. So there's let me double check here. So Ellipsis, there's a big post there you can check in the description box down below. And there's also Anshlun's post. And Anshlun, my brain wants to say Ashlyn, but there's an S there. It's Anshlun's post, the overall community feedback. Pretty straightforward post for the Shadow Priests going into the Shadowlands. So if you want more information from Shadow Priests that know way more about this than me, that is totally down there. I also spoke to Public and DJ Riff, both before one of them and after the other when I did my testing today, trying to make sure I was on the same page. So a lot of information will not just be from me. It's from chat, it's from them, and there are a lot of shared sentiments, but we're in this learning period together. So hopefully I'll be able to at least put that all out there. If you want the dungeon run video, link is down below in the description box as well. Next to, of course, the entire VOD of the 5 or so hours of testing today that we did for the Shadow Priest, where a lot of it was like a lot of discussion and sorting through things, because overall, not a lot has changed, but that is in it part of the problem. But that is all linked down below. You'll also find down there, of course, if you would like to support what I do here, the show, the stream, and everything in between. I am a partner with Corsair, and I've been with them now for well over a year, and I use a lot of their stuff. It's literally on my head right now and under my fingertips every single day. But if you are looking for any bits and bobs or pieces and parts for your current build or upcoming build, your new headset, new mouse, I have sworn by Corsair stuff for years before I even signed with them. And if you want to support what I do here directly, there's a link down below where I can get you 10% off your whole order, as well as free standard shipping right now. However, I will let you know some of the stock on items is a little low now due to the global state of things, but keep your weather eye on the horizon, because I imagine things will still restock eventually. And it keeps me doing this right here. And let's get into it then, I suppose. I don't know where to begin. I do know where to begin. We'll go with the easy stuff, the stuff that really doesn't matter too much. The baseline adjustments for the priest in general. So Mind Soothe is coming back. It only works on humanoids and dragonkin. All right then. This Mass Dispel rank 2 is actually a Mass Debate. It is the exact same spell you have on live currently. This is a fake rank. I don't know why Blizzard did this, but Blizzard has now tore apart your Mass Dispel removing immunities and put it as a level up rank. I don't know why. Power Infusion has also returned to the Shadow Priest as well at level 58. It is all priests, but of course Shadow now gets it back as it used to have it before as a talent, but now it's baseline. 25% haste, for 20 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown. Power Infusion is currently off the global cooldown. Now, there is some forum posting about Power Infusion, about how it might bring up like a degenerate toxic gameplay loop of priests casting on one other DPS and chaining them together to make one player have almost permanent 25% additional haste, so you'll never get to use it yourself because it's off the GCD. You just macro and spam it when you're in the next cast sequence order. Blah, 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 blah. Maybe, sure, potentially, but if you're in a guild that's going to do that, that's your decision. If you're in a guild that's going to auction off your Power Infusions and your focus magics, then that's awful, but sure, I guess. By default, you'll probably just use it for yourself. You'll use your Power Infusion probably in Voidform windows, or to build up to a Voidform window faster, or to use it as a cooldown to help do more damage when you don't have a Voidform available. Right? It's your cooldown. Use it as you will. because it's also exterior utility if you think about it that way, right? Because most priests would just use it on themselves, but if you don't, it's actually utility to cast it on someone else if it works better for them, for example. If you're helping out your Frost DK or whatever to make sure their Breath of Sindragosa pipes, then that's up to you, right? Isn't that your decision to use with your cooldown? So the whole like degenerate loop that immediately people go to on the forums is like, oh, it's awful. It's not Blessing of Might. It's not that bad. It might be kind of weird, but Blizzard wants you to have things to give other people, and so be it, because you still have power. You still have power and fortitude, right? These are all at 5% now, by the way. So Battle Shout, Int, and Fort are all 5% to match the debuffs. Granted, of course, we have other external things coming as well, like curses and Wind Fury Totem and things that may or may not be 5% in power, but we'll get over that later. Additionally, I'm not going to talk about that right now, but everything else for the core is you have Shadow Word Death baseline, which is over here in the core kit. This is a weird one. Shadow Word Death is no longer the talented version. Also, Shadow Word Death isn't an execute. I paused for dramatic effect there because you heard that right. It is not an execute. I don't have Body and Soul talented right now. What am I doing wrong across me? But this is a 15-second cooldown where you just go bleh, and then it goes bleh. It deals some damage. If the target doesn't die, you take the same damage it deals that you dealt to the target and generates 15 insanity. Currently, it's a filler-ish move, and its movement, but its damage is pretty poo-poo. But that's obviously tuning. So we'll see if the damage makes it worth it, but as not an interrupt, or not as an execute where you'd use it later on in the rotation. It just sort of interrupts your normal pattern of global cooldowns, which you're used to kind of casting in certain sequences, to add this one also to the rotation, I guess. It's just kind of weird. The current version has the 2 charges, the 9-second recharge. It's actually doing, the current one has 187.5% spell power damage as an execute, where it still does the generates insanity, 15 or 30 if it kills the target. That doesn't hurt the priest at all. This new one now is the 25-second base cooldown. A rank 2 takes off 10 seconds to a 15-second cooldown, then reduced by haste. 0 charges. No longer an execute. It always hurts you unless the target dies. It is only 115% spell power. Quite a bit lower, which makes me wonder if they're going to tie it to your mastery, because it's so weak. Maybe they'll let it scale with your mastery to make it umphy, because there's definitely things that aren't done in the Shadow Priest kit so far, and because there's just NYIs that just aren't working right now, and there's some extra spell ranks in the database that don't exist, but they exist. So I'm wondering if it's going to go to Madness, because right now, of course, it does Shadow Word Pain, Vampiric Touch, Shadow Word Void, or Mind Blast, Mind Flay, Mind Seer, Void Eruption, and Void Bolt. So maybe they'll make Shadow Word Death scale with your mastery to make it actually have some punch, because right now, over the course of an entire dungeon run, the dungeon run you can watch in the VOD down below, I think it was like 8% of my damage over the course of an entire dungeon with 4 bosses. It was not great. It was incredibly mediocre compared to what it's supposed to feel like an execute to do some oomph. And then we talked about it on the stream today about how, what if then Discipline and Holy you would have an execute? Yeah, but Hammer of Wrath exists. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. So, what else we have here? There is implementations on it that are just really weird. There's more information in Anshlun's post, but there's a new talent that works with this that is called Death and Madness, which if the target dies within 6 seconds after being struck by your Shadow Word Death, you'll gain 40 insanity over 4 seconds, and the cooldown of your SWD will reset. Actually, kind of neat. It's taking Shadow Word Death in the right direction, kind of making it that Shadow Burn-ish kind of play style. You want to have those mouse over macros to sort of snipe targets in raids to get that extra huge bump in insanity generation. It has that momentum style that Demon Hunters can get with their Ventral Retreat, where they jump up a whole bunch of Havoc Fury rather. So it's there. However, on one of the first NYIs, the debuff, there's a debuff associated with this. See the debuff right here? This debuff has to land on the target. Also, this says within 7 seconds, and this says within 6 seconds. the debuff has to land. If you get the killing blow, you don't get this effect. You have to take damage with SWD, and then the target has to die, and then it resets and gives you the insanity. So it's not... Anyway, I'm not going to get too like blah about this stuff because we had plenty of this talk today. I want to sort of, before we get into a bit more of the deeper pieces here, Wordup had a great sort of discussion with me today. It's at the end of the dungeon VOD, so it's not going where if you still want to go back and listen to us talk about Shadow Priest, because he played one a lot in BFA as a ranged ult. He saying, have you seen Spider-Man Homecoming? No spoilers in the trailer, where they did like the repeat of the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man when he was holding the train back with his webs on all the walls. This is the reverse. In Homecoming, Spider-Man webs across that giant boat and tries to pull this boat back together. So we need a Photoshop of this where Spider-Man in the middle is Voidform, and one half of the boat are damage over time spells, and the other half of the boat is Insanity mechanic, the actual builder spender of Insanity. And Voidform is trying to hold them both together. The yo-yo effect with this spec is so real. Other things that aren't hooked up yet. There is a Fade rank 2 that is in your Spellbook, but is not in the game, where you can lower your aggro radius while Fade is active. Sure, not just your threat, but your aggro radius for walking by mobs, which of course, Mines too could be used in Mythic Plus to avoid a mob pack if they're dragonkins or humanoids. I don't think there are any dragons in the Shadowlands. So, and most things are dead here, not humanoids. Anyway, and then again, let's see this thing. So Mind Blast, let me untalent Shadow Word Void real quick here. So Mind Blast's cooldown was changed. That your passive for Mind Blast's CDR now is 7 seconds. Meaning the cooldown of Mind Blast before my haste is taken into effect right now is actually 8 seconds. Meaning it's not divisible by the 1.5 second base GCD. So now it has arbitrary cooldown, like desyncing by 0.5 seconds in your overall globals that you would actually cast normally. Because as you gain more haste as Shadow Priest, as you would Voidform, everything scales down the same exponential rate, right? Or I get multiplicative rate rather. But more haste, lower GCD, cast times increase, that kind of stuff. So now Mind Blast is just desynced by that. So hopefully Blizzard gets the feedback on this. This should be 7.5 seconds to make the cooldown 7.5 seconds. Shadow Word Void is 9 seconds before haste. So it's one more global beyond 7.5. It's still totally fine. But again, if you're not playing Shadow Priest right now, which is one of the fundamental problems with Shadow Priest, without Shadow Word Void, you're also doing it wrong. So they could just make Shadow Word Void the same way that Mind Blast worked for Shadow, would just give it 2 charges, but that's a whole other can of worms. Because Shadow Priest plays. It works. Kind of. It plays. I had a pretty okay time in the dungeon. I definitely felt the problems with the spec. I felt the issues that you were feeling. I mean, granted, I have crap gear. And I understand that with better gear, the rotation smooths out. It cleans up. It gets better. But it shouldn't have to always get better. It should hopefully work on the baseline. Crap gear only had 11 stacks of lingering insanity there. But again, that's still a talent, not baseline. And this is the weirdness that you have right now, is that Shadow Priest is going to be sort of re-gutted and baselined again with everything leaves BFA. And some of these core components to the Shadow Priest, the problem with Voidform not feeling rewarding, the weirdness that still exists where Shadow Form is 10% damage done for spell damage, and Voidform isn't an additional amount, it just adds 10% more. When it says 20% damage here, that doesn't take you from 10 to 30, it takes you from 10 to 20. And Legacy of the Void, of course, still adds that extra 5%. The haste scaling of Voidform was also cut down, so it takes way longer to even gain any. It doesn't have a lasting impact without lingering insanity. So it removes your ability to usually talent into things like Mindbender or for forever, when was the last time you actually cast Void Torrent when it wasn't tied to Xal'atath in Legion? Additionally, Shadowman was buffed though. Shadowman is 220% spell power, up from 180. Sure. I guess. It's only the actual heal and the dot itself that were both increased. Sure, I suppose. Heal yourself, forehead. The other thing about numbers, real quick, is that on the alpha, which is mirrored to the live environment of BFA, Shadow Priest has a minus 32% damage aura on all of their major abilities and a minus 18% damage aura on Vampiric Touch and Shadowed Pain. So these are both still present currently in Shadowlands. So a handful of these numbers are also additional nerfs, or they're slowly pulling the damage out of the base kit to zero out your aura, but we'll see. A lot of auras have been baselined back to zero. So Shadowed Pain, for example, is now, the dot is 74.7% spell power, down from 99.2. So it's still lower because of your aura, and it was also lowered again. But that also could be because of things like Dark Void. The overall nature of what you've seen before with AoE caps have come into play. A lot of melee have AoE caps, and the new square root formula, where damage, it gets reduced by dividing by the square root of the targets you're actually attacking. There is none of that on Shadow Priest. None. And the joke came up in chat today about, well, no amount of AoE cap changes are going to change how Shadow Priest AoEs. But it's weird to me when I saw this, and I played Dark Void in the dungeon, and it was Shadowed Pain was my highest source of damage over the course of the entire run. And, you know, mob pack comes around. There's 8 stupid zombie boys. I Dark Void one of them, and then they all have Shadowed Pain on them. But they reduce the damage Shadowed Pain does only on the dot, not the initial hit, of course, when you hard cast it yourself. So it's a weird one. It's a strange one for me. Nothing happened to Vampiric Touch either. It's still the same spell coefficient that it is right now in BFA. Nothing changed there. So there's a new Void Eruption rank 2 that does show in the Spellbook, but doesn't actually show up here. Let me take away Legacy of the Void. So Void Eruption is a 2.5 second cast, which is your sort of big AoE. Also, no target cap, no square root damage fall off. It's hits. We did multiple turnips during the testing VOD. And there's like a bajillion turnips and the target dummies that hit every single one of them for the full damage it's supposed to do. There was no AoE fall off whatsoever. But this is a 2.5 second cast time before Legacy of the Void or before haste. There is a extra NYI rank that's actually flagged in the database. If I remember, I'll put check the description box down below. I'll put the link because it actually says in caps, testing do not use -Lewis or Luis or Luis, whoever, maybe a dev note there. So there is another rank of this that's reducing the cast time by 25%, meaning that Void Eruption and Legacy of the Void would make the cast time of Void Eruption a second or faster. You would just snap right into Voidform. It would be very quick, almost in a way that would be obnoxious because it would be a lower cast time than your GCD would be. So you'd actually have to wait a fraction of a GCD before you can cast it to go in if you had this in the, again, NYI stuff. I have no idea. And now we come to it. So I went over Death and Madness, and I'll touch on Sword of Madness here in a moment, but the big thing here is this one right here, all right? So we're only 19 minutes into this video, and this might take the next little bit, because this one passive has, I would historically say, the Blizzard effect. The Blizzard effect of finding a problem, making a solution to that problem, but then making more problems, which is game development, right? That's literally game development at its core. This, as you might read it, Void Bolt can be cast while channeling Mind Flay. I can't show it off right here, of course. There is a GIF linked below in the description as well. Lots of extra resources, like I said at the beginning of this video, of other things we found out today and other posts and stuff like that. But there's a GIF that Kalrell made who helps me out doing all of my testing, of showing you what this looks like when you get to test it. And of course, it's still on, garbage geared characters, so still. But the Void Bolt, when you are channeling your Mind Flay, is still on the GCD. So when you channel a Mind Flay, which normally lasts 3 seconds, 1.5 seconds of it, barring no haste, because it all scales the same way, would be on the global. And then if you cast your Void Bolt during that Mind Flay, that's the last 1.5 seconds of that Mind Flay, and then Mind Flay stops. Which is, it's fine, but the faster your rotation goes, the shorter your window to actually cast any Mind Flay at all, or the problem that comes up that Anshlun talks about in the giant post, and mostly Ellipsis giant math post. It's a huge buff, and I think some of the community members are freaking out thinking this is the only way to play Shadow Priest, is to only cast Void Bolt now with channeling your Mind Flay. Which it works sort of like when a Mistweaver monk is channeling their Soothing Mist, and they can cast instant spells off of that. It's both. So it's obviously a huge DPS increase, because it, on average, will gain you 2 ticks of Mind Flay, which would be 6 Insanity, which over the course of an encounter will be gigantic, tons and tons of extra Insanity, and the 2 ticks of damage of Mind Flay, which will add up to more and more damage that you actually don't get right now. The problem is, this forces you, when you're playing optimally, to ignore the utility that your Void Bolt has in the current instance of the game. So if I go into Voidform real quick here, and obviously like the first one, bloom, you get to move, you get to stutter step when you are casting your Void Bolt, because you put yourself on the GCD. That entire thing is gone because I'm on a Void Bolt right now, and then I do one of these, and one of these, and then my Void Bolt's back, so I want to do one of these, and then Void Bolt, and then we'll do one of these. It definitely makes you turret, which, sure, you could look at it either way. One way you could look at it is if, well, when I get to turret, I get more damage. And Shadow Priest historically, for a long time now, has had issues with single target damage. So this is a tuning knob that Blizzard's probably trying to put into the game that changes how much damage you get to do when you get to tunnel. But if you are moving, you would still use Void Bolt the same way you use it right now. But that does mean you're losing out on damage. But it does mean you gain damage when you get to tunnel. So what's the trade-off here? What's the thing? I mean, my first point of feedback was, but why does it incur the GCD? Because then when you Mind Flay, wait for the global, Void Bolt during Mind Flay, wait for the global, you still have to wait to even change to another ability. You can't like weave a Mind Flay, get your instant Void Bolt, and then go back to your Shadow Word Void or your Shadow Word Death or refresh your dots or whatever have you. I mean, don't refresh dots during Void Form. It's usually bad manner. But there's something there that's just not fully fleshed out yet on how it feels to play, because Kalrell got to use it today because he leveled a priest when we did the testing. And our overall damage numbers, I was derping around with different builds, and I was doing a little more AoE damage than he was because I was running Void Crash as well in the dungeon. But our overall damage numbers across the entire dungeon we did were really close. He wasn't like leaps and bounds ahead of me for damage. And actually, we both got out DPS'd by our tank, but our tank had a Covenant ability. And if you know historically about how Covenant abilities work, I'm not talking about them a lot in this video, but Covenant abilities for Shadow Priest are actually like all pretty awful. Like they just have no synergy, or one makes you not be a Shadow Priest for 10 seconds. So a lot of this in this video right now. There's a lot of like my hands up in the air going, I don't know what's going on here. Because you can build a Shadow Priest loadout. You can play Shadow Priest mostly like, this. Auspicious Spirits is definitely going to not feel anywhere near as powerful without things like all the Azerite traits you currently have right now that make it go crazy. You have tons of crit. So Shadow Crash might come back on the menu, boys, or whatever. Right? It's like basically the build you have all of the time. Dark Ascension might sort of float up there in priority earlier on in the expansion, because you can do what is referred to, at least by chat today, sort of telling me that it's the 1 minute Void Form, where you build, go into Void Form, blast, immediately come back out with Lingering Sanity, and then Dark Ascension to go back in again. So you do 30 seconds in both window, basically, to have 1 minute of Void Form, which is pretty awesome. and then you have 30 seconds of downtime or so, and then you Dark Ascension again. So it's you do the whole chain again, rather. There's something there, and the builds work, and your utility and the amount of healing you can pump out with Sand Lane is huge. Even if Body and Soul becomes kind of set and forget a little bit of the time, but you can't argue that Sand Lane isn't just like huge, stupid utility. It's massive. And your other like touch of utility, of course, coming back to you in Power Infusion. It's not going to give you anything crazy for Mythic Plus, except, of course, the note earlier about how there's no AoE caps. Shadow Crash, no AoE caps. All targets within 8 yards. Nothing you have in your kit has any AoE problems, whereas like I-Beam is square root, just completely crushed. So the more targets you actually I-Beam, the less damage you're doing to each individual target. But you don't have to worry about that. You just cross dot things, throw up your Dark Void, Shadow Crash, whatever, blast, get in there with your Mind Seer. Also, no AoE caps, nothing. So the Mythic Plus debacle, I don't know, but the issue with this one change with Void Bolt and this is still, I don't know. And this new version of Shadow Word Death, I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think in all of my years of doing this and testing and talking to Shadow Priest on my show, did any of them ever say, yeah, we want Shadow Word Death baseline, but isn't an execute. This is not an execute, where it's always been an execute. It's a huge, crazy builder because you can slap into Voidform, at least with Legacy of the Void, pretty quickly. And the damage you're taking for yourself is like, whatever. Your Vampiric Touch is going to out-heal it. It's not even a big deal. It's not going to really matter, right? It just deals like 400 damage. How many ticks of Vampiric Touch will that heal you up? And just put a shield on yourself. When you're in combat, you still, of course, have hallucinations. So when you shield yourself, you gain 6 insanity. So not even like really a DPS loss, right? So it's weird, actually. In the dungeon, it's very possible that dispelling, casting a shield randomly, there are moments in the rotation where that is the better GCD to do to gain a little bit of insanity to go back into the Voidform window, which is kind of neat, I guess. But that's like a very feelsy, crafty feeling where you can't just keep doing damage. The better choice might be to throw up a powered shield and then keep doing damage, which sure, just make like a focus, target your tank, macro, powered shield, go back to doing your business, right? To get that little bit extra insanity. Maybe it's like a target count thing. It didn't really happen very much. It just came up in conversation today as sort of a weird sticky point. I have some notes down here from Public as well. He said with a good amount of gear, things have a possibility to have a good pace, but still very to be determined. And the spec still looks good visually, even though he did noted he wants his tentacles back. So bring back the tentacles for the Shadow Priest, please. That would be very, very nice. But there's a lot of ugly points, mostly the Covenants, which I'm not going to go into here. The Mind Blast desync is really gross. And the Void Bolt rank 2, which it says rank 2. This is actually rank 3, because the second rank of Void Bolt is actually the dot extension, the plus 3 seconds on your 2 dots around the target you Void Bolt. That AoE extension there, that's rank 2. This is actually rank 3. So again, NYI. This is obviously just a string in a script somewhere, but still, a lot of these little things are Shadow Priest, so I'm feeling that they're not done yet. Hopefully, they make Lingering Sanity baseline, because that means you have this teeter-totter, and the longer you stay in Void form, the stronger you are outside of it, so it doesn't just yo-yo so hard and just fall off the face of the earth. And that feeling of how you rotate through your abilities, right? And this baseline means you could probably use Void Torrent again, put Mindbender here. Suggestions come up about maybe retooling Devouring Plague to be a dot you can only cast in Void form that ticks to give you insanity. So you have your Mindbender choice, which is like a burst of it. You can have a Void, if your Devouring Plague dot that you cast when you go in after you would Void Bolt, that would just tick for insanity for, I don't know, 10, 8 seconds, something like that. Something else you do. And the longer you stay in Void form, the more Devouring Plague you get to cast. Or you can Void Torrent for a big burst of damage, locking your insanity, and then you just gain more, and then you keep blasting. Like, there's something there in that pudding that really could be that just like gross voidy pudding that could be really good. Because Twist of Fate's good, Misery's good, Dark Void has its situational uses. This is going in the right direction, but obviously needs to be hooked up right properly. Auspicious Spirits can still fly off the handle if multiple targets are present, because the more targets you have Shadow Word Pain on, the more Auspicious Spirits fly out of your everywhere. Shadowy Insight and Fortress of Mind are still poo-poo pants. That's mostly because Shadow Word Void, or this function of Mind Blast, should just be how Mind Blast works. Because only having one charge just doesn't feel good, and you know what I'm talking about if you've played Shadow Priest. So I'm sorry to say that there really isn't anything moving forward with getting this kind of stuff. Hopefully during the feedback junket we can put some feedback forward to Blizzard. To round out all this, I'm going to say that there's more information in the post about Surrender to Madness. This version of it is totally junk. It's weird. You cast a debuff on some target and you have 25 seconds to either kill it or you die, but you can cast it on, like, you know, a baby scorpion in the Scorpion fight, right? To tunnel into Big Ron. But if that baby scorpion dies, you don't. But the Surrender to Madness effect ends immediately. There's not like a duration or anything like that. It just stops. So it's kind of neat for like dungeon bursting down targets here and there, maybe, where you can use it as a rotational cooldown in dungeons. But I feel like it's so tedious to make sure you don't brick over and over in a dungeon because, oh, he almost died. It was like 2 seconds away. I almost, you know, Shadow Word Death hit for 4 damage because it doesn't scale with my mastery. And I died. Like, there's just... And there's more talk in the dungeon VOD that Wordup and I talked about how, like, this form of Dark Ascension should just be your cooldown. And then Voidform rotationally is sort of like a Balance Druid teetering between eclipses. And then when you Dark Ascension Voidform, it's like a big one. Like a set duration, you're just in, you just go. There's no Insanity Teeter-Totter. And then your Insanity Teeter-Totter is your base form. So you bounce back and forth for a little bit, and then when you need to actually go in, like every other almost DPS in the entire game, you're not at the ebb and flow of you didn't delay your void form for 15 seconds to then go in to make sure it lines up with this part of an encounter 4 minutes into the encounter later on based on movement, and you can't build during this time and you figure it all like that. It's just ick. It's just ick. Shadow Priest is neat. It's fun. Thematically, Blizzard needs to just decide on what form they want you to go, and I feel for you, and hopefully changes happen. Oh boy, let me know your comments down below, what you think of the new changes for the Shadow Priest. If you made it throughout this whole video, if you want to slay on that like button, if you want to Shadow Word Death it, if you want to hit one of those shadow crashes on it, let me know that you enjoy the coverage, of course, and give me your feedback in the comment section if I was right or wrong. Or if you want to support what I do directly here on the channel by picking yourself up some Corsair gear, new mouse, new keyboard. You need some more bindings. That new scimitar just came out a while ago. This guy right here. And of course, you can get 10% off your peripheral order, either for this or Elgato gear if you're looking for any peripheral things, and free standard shipping, depending on, of course, stock. So keep that in mind. Things might be out of stock right now because of the global, you know what's going on. But thank you very much for listening and or watching. My name has been Bay, and this has been our shadow pimp. Oh, I got new gloves. It ruined my transmog. F. I didn't notice. Go back. There we go. Everything's okay now. Thank you very much for watching and or listening. Again, my name has been Bay. I will see you all in the Holy Priest and Disciplined Priest coverage coming up soon enough.